Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode of Photography Live podcast, Photos and Stories. My name is Andrew Biraj. I'm a professional photojournalist based in Washington, D.C. Photos and Stories is a live social media live podcast on photography. In this fortnightly broadcasted live show, I have the privilege to invite legendary and successful professionals in the photography industry from all around the world. My purpose is to present behind the picture stories of the life and journey of these legends. Today, actually, it's the fifth episode. I'm sorry for the mistake. In this fifth episode of Photos and Stories, it's a great honor to present the acclaimed Magnum photographer, winner of prestigious Eugene Smith Grant, Pulitzer Centre Grant, and ICP Infinity Award, author of 3 books, and a longtime friend of mine, Peter Van Agtmael. Please welcome Peter Van Agtmael.
Oh, hey. Take a
Hey, Peter.
Yeah, take a drag of that cigarette.
Uh,
How you doing, Andrew?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good to see you after a long time, right?
It has been a long time.
Yeah. I just wanna go back a little bit for our viewers that Peter and I was so lucky to be in the group with Peter in the Joopsword Masterclass in 2008 in WordPress Forum Amsterdam. So and that was an amazing group, isn't it?
It really was, yeah.
Yeah.
We were all babies though at the time.
Yep. Awesome. I think I have some photos as well if I dig through. So
That can be my guest gift. I want to see this.
thank you. So how have you been, Peter? I know you have been traveling a lot. You've been here and there, and what have you been doing during these COVID situation?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on it pretty hard the last few months. I live in New York, and so the first few weeks of the lockdown, I was here when it turned into a ghost town, kind of documenting that shift. And then I was in Maryland for a few weeks, looking at kind of the possible economic and political fallout of COVID in rural Maryland, which is all sort of completely Trump supporting area of the state. The political dynamic there seemed to be a sort of stand-in for a lot of other places, and that's where I'm from. So I was some weeks there, and then I came back to New York to continue covering COVID here. I was in a funeral home for a big story, funerals at a cemetery, daily life in various forms, and then the George Floyd protests in Minneapolis, the fall of the statues in Confederate statues in Richmond, the Trump rally in Oklahoma, and now I'm on vacation. So I was thinking to go out to Portland, but I realized that after a few months straight of work, I needed a little break.
Yeah, of course you do. Yeah, you have been all around, and I've been watching your photos all the time and on Instagram, and here and there, of course. So yeah, if you don't mind, because it's this in this format, we usually go back a little bit and then we start from the beginning. So I know that you grew up in Maryland, in Bethesda, Maryland, to be precise, in the Washington D.C. suburb area. So how was it like? When was the time you decided to take up photography? I know you have been living in South Africa too, right? And then when was the time you decided, and how was the process?
Yeah, I came to photography in university. I'd always been interested in photographs and attracted to them, and it was certainly a way I was trying to understand the world was through photographs, but I hadn't necessarily thought about being a photographer or photography as a profession. It just didn't occur to me. But in university, I was studying history and realizing that academia was not really a good fit for me. Nor was I just didn't feel passionate for it. And there were a lot of people that were both passionate for it and much better at it than me. And I thought, well, do I want to just be some mediocre professor, or shall I try and find what my kind of path in life is? And so I realized that I loved history, but not necessarily the research process. I liked it more as a, to pursue the forms of history that I was interested in on my own terms, and so that kind of brought me to journalism as being a way of experiencing history in the making, which was appealing to me. So I thought I'd be a journalist, a writer. That was more my background and what my studies had been in. And I took a photography class just on a kind of on a whim, as a means of just branching out a little bit, trying things that I were outside my comfort zone, and it was a very surreal experience, because it very quickly on in this process of taking this sort of basic introductory class, I completely kind of fell in love with the process. It was almost a mystical experience for me, and so I felt really confident in that way that a 19-year-old does, that was my kind of going to be my path. And then sort of events conspired to kind of crystallize that idea for me. September 11th happened about a year after I first started taking pictures. Then the war in Iraq, of course. And at that moment, sort of America and the United States, my generation, a transformative event in history and a major event in kind of journalism, all were kind of consolidating at the same moment. So by the end of university, I'd kind of realized, not only that I want to be a photographer, but I wanted to be a photographer documenting these wars and their fallout, and that's what I've been doing for the last 14 years. Of course, it took a couple years after college to work my way up to that, but since 2006, end of 2005, that's been what I've been working on almost exclusively.
Awesome. And then after that, we have been watching a lot of important photos from your side. So today, I think you have prepared a small presentation for us. So if you want to go, just let me know whenever you feel free to go through that. I just wanted to ask you to begin with, like, I know that you were, so like, since 2016 in 2006, you have been concentrating on the American wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also as well as the consequences in the United States. You were still traveling through the whole United States to document your experience about American lives. So I heard you often saying that this journey is more like finding yourself through these wars. Even in your last book, The Buzzing at the Sill, you mentioned that in reality, at some point, quote unquote, in reality, at some point, the desire to photograph war became too strong to ignore. It was like a constant buzzing. It wasn't a lust for violence, but for proving myself by doing something. I believe that I believe it was meaningful on the stage of history. I don't see any of my decisions as particularly courageous or significant anymore. So, what exactly do you mean by this?
Um, what I meant by that is part of this attraction that I had to photographing these wars was about journalism and history, and the fact that I was kind of newly politicized. And those were significant factors. But what were also significant factors were that I felt and continue to feel a need to acknowledge is that the choice to go cover conflicts, especially for a sustained period of time, isn't just about duty to one's profession and to helping craft a historical narrative. It's also about kind of darker impulses, darker, more selfish, more primal impulses, and I think as a young man, I sanctified these ideas of physical courage and war being a process of becoming a man. These are the conditioning from society was quite strong in that, and I wasn't particularly confident in my own skin, not particularly happy in many ways, and I think I fell for the age-old con, the age-old seduction that you become a man by going to war. With some such nonsense as that, and it's been a process of unraveling, where my sense of kind of duty and responsibility was, and where my sense of kind of selfishness was, and so that's why I write about that. I've found that the journalism profession, the photography, photojournalism profession especially, is traffics in a lot of myth making and self-aggrandizing, that I don't think is particularly honest or accurate. And we're supposed to be in the truth business, and whatever the truth means. We all have our own version of the truth, obviously, but I find this period of I can't tell an honest story about the United States or about war, honest to me anyhow, without looking at myself and my reasons. So the writing in that book and in all my books is mostly looking outward, looking at trying to fill in context around the images, that the information that can't be contained in the images, but a lot of it is also about kind of dissecting my own motivations. And hopefully between the two, you get both a fuller picture of what I'm trying to say with the work, and maybe a more full picture of who's saying those things, so you can kind of take or leave those lessons at your discretion.
Yeah, I don't want to miss the chance to see your photographs too. So do you want to start with the
Sure.
any particular project or anything?
What I did is a bit of an experiment. Is I've kind of woven together. I've done these various books, and I have another one coming out at the end of October, right before the election. It's kind of the end of this series of books that really looks at the United States and its relationship to the world and its kind of relationship to itself after 9/11. And while they're all individual books that are kind of grouped around a series of themes, they're really one work about the United States in this period of time. And so I've just reshuffled it a bit to show a selection from it. So I think I picked about 40 pictures from the books, and then a few recent pictures from COVID and the civil rights movement, all of which will eventually get folded into this work as well. But
Yeah.
I don't have the terms yet at this moment for that, and it's a bit more recent, and I just haven't processed it, so I just kind of stuck that at the end. So shall I share my screen?
Yes, please. You're all waiting for that.
Okay. Let's see. Okay,
Yes.
we have it.
Yep, we got it.
Some sort of infinity loop here. Okay. Get this. Let's see if my computer can handle it. Okay, you can see it big?
Yes, we're good.
Okay.
Awesome.
I'm just gonna. So I'll kind of just walk through
Sure.
some of these images briefly, and by all means interrupt if and when you want to. And I picked both pictures I like and pictures that I think kind of symbolize a bit what I'm trying to do.
Sure.
This work. So this is a picture from Afghanistan in 2007. A helicopter coming to land at a remote outpost, and it's both a kind of a picture of obviously sort of a striking picture of a scene, but also a picture that represents to me the limitations of photography. This particular outpost was one where there was a long kind of, it was symbolic of a strategic history in eastern Afghanistan and the failures of the American military to wage an effective counterinsurgency strategy out there. And the fate of some of the men in this image was ultimately death or serious injury, as a few months after this photograph was taken, a very severe ambush killed or wounded 90% of this platoon. So it's a picture that exists in its own kind of discrete form here, but it's also a picture that I wrote around a lot as a means of kind of fleshing out the narrative, because this picture says none of those things, and I've always been interested in that relationship of where pictures end and words begin. This work very much is weaving in and out of different worlds. I think if there's any kind of hallmark to the books I've been doing, is that they dance around time and space and geography and wildly differing situations that are all nonetheless interlinked. Funny enough, the first time I tried to do that was when we did the You've Swart masterclass back in 2008. It was the first time I tried to create an organizing structure around all these different ideas. And I remember it pretty dramatically failed in that context. And I remember people both not really liking it nor really getting it. And in retrospect, fair enough. But what is interesting is that from that early failure, I found a form that actually did work, and that I was onto something there. I just didn't know how to do it. A good lesson for anyone listening, that sometimes you got to fail a bunch of times, but until you succeed.
Yeah, I think a lot of our viewers are more interested to know how did you overcome from your failures, because we always see the end product, right? So, but there's a huge emotional and philosophical journey when you go through your image making process. So I think in between this journey, we all fail, and we come back, and we keep failing, and then at the end we come up with a certain picture. So yeah, go on. So
Yeah, well, as we know, photography is mostly a process of failure, no matter which way you slice it.
yeah.
So, I think the resilience in the face of it. I mean, I think that, for me, it's like, if you don't love it so deeply that you're willing to risk failure all the time, then it's probably not the right profession for you. I mean, we all know it's a challenging profession, that one's kind of naive belief in oneself has to overcome disappointment after disappointment. I mean, I certainly know in my career or whatever that I've been very fortunate, very blessed in many ways. But no one sees all the disappointments and failures, which has a far longer list than the successes. Any grant that gets rattled off, I usually get rejected 5 or 6 or 7 times before winning it. It's like,
Yeah, sure.
I've learned to live and love rejection on some level as a means of self-improvement. But anyhow, I'll move on. And so this is the Senate Armed Services Committee. And so to me, what I'm also doing in this work is kind of trying to interlink these different worlds, from the most remote part of Afghanistan and the previous image to the Senate Armed Services Committee. This is the sort of legislative body that oversees the budget for the military in the United States. And then the photographs, I think, serve their role as a stand-in for and metaphor for the society, and we know that American society is one that's steeped in violence and imagery of violence, and we're steeped in it from a young age. This little boy in the camouflage shirt with the toy gun. And photojournalism or photography to me, while I feel very much like photojournalism is kind of a convenient label on some level for the work, I've never really felt fully part of photojournalism or any other part of photography for that matter, any other label of photography. You know, to me, photography is just a means of self-expression that should also integrate all the different languages of photography that have been kind of considered and determined, and I draw inspiration from all these different languages of photography. So in a picture like this of the funeral of a young man named Seth Ricketts, who was killed in Afghanistan on his fourth tour, you know, while the tradition might be to photograph of a funeral would be to photograph the grief, which I did as well. To me, it was also important to, and this is where history comes in, to frame the image also in a what I considered a more historical context. And this was a period of time in the United States when, while there was a lot of rhetoric supporting the troops and supporting the war, on the ground, the situation was different. There was largely kind of indifference as people wanted to move on with their lives and forget what was happening. And so this thought from the family that they could fill this large auditorium with people that ended up being largely empty, to me was a powerful symbol of kind of disconnect.
Sure. If you, um, if I want to focus a little bit on your photography style, like your photography style is very distinctive, right? And I have always found your photographs very metaphorical, and they're factual but very fictional at the same time. So during the masterclass, you have also shared that you have not been into film photography when you first started, as far as I remember. Like, how did you determine your photographic signature?
Um, I didn't necessarily. It's a good question. I don't know if I thought about it, and I think within the style, it's funny. It's like hard for me to see my own style somehow in a weird way because it is pretty loose. You know, I'm moving in and out of a lot of different kinds of light, a lot of different kinds of distances, a lot of different kinds of angles. You know, I wonder what the common thread is. I haven't maybe thought enough about it, but how this style, I suppose, came about was really like it came from initially from just looking at an enormous amount of work, an enormous range of photographers, and seeing all the different capabilities of photography. Um, you know, just the range of expression that photography could do. And then there'd be one element of someone's work I liked, so I kind of tried to remember that when I was working, and then another element of someone else's work that I tried to remember when I was working. And of course, early on, your pictures sort of look like your influences, but over time, just through this sheer obsession of work, um, all those little influences started shaping into something that I think was my own. It also came about when I had something to say for myself. You know, it's hard to form a vision when on the basis of nothing, of course. But as I went deeper and deeper into these wars and their effect on the civilian populations in Iraq and Afghanistan, on their effect on the soldiers and their families back here, and the way society related or didn't relate to these wars, you know, I started crafting ideas. I started crafting a narrative of what was happening. And then I suppose, sort of subconsciously, I started finding the kinds of images that were kind of like the visual imprint of those thoughts and feelings, a visual imprint of how they existed in the world. So I think that's kind of how the style came about, a combination between assimilating a lot of different types of photography and crafting it into my own vision, and then going out into the world, and especially particular subject matter in such a sustained long-term manner that um, you know, I could find a certain specificity of expression to my own eyes and brain within the world. Is that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Do you want to go to the next?
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
And what you say is yes, metaphors. A lot of the pictures, as I think I might have mentioned earlier, are these kind of stand-ins for
Yeah.
ideas. The last one being a stand-in for an idea about disconnect for the U.S. population from the conflicts. This picture is about is it a training camp for lawyers training to work within the Iraqi judicial system? The irony of this is U.S. military lawyers training to work within the Iraqi judicial system. The irony of that being that we never did integrate in any way into the judicial system. We were an occupying force with and immunity was, and all the soldiers had immunity from prosecution through the supposedly sovereign government of Iraq. So they were training for a mission that didn't actually exist. And that to me is again a symbol of the terms of these wars. And a picture like this, But of course, within all of it, I want it to be aesthetic. I want it to be a strongly crafted image. I want it oftentimes to have this sort of surreal quality, something that is a little bit confusing, a little bit undefinable, but also is rooted in substantive information and rooted in a narrative of these conflicts that I feel strongly about. So this is both a picture of a document of a American base in Iraq, and also, to my mind, the kind of a symbol of the disconnect of the American soldiers from the Iraqi populace. And in weaving together these pictures, and the sequencing obviously is far from perfect because I just kind of put this together, a bunch of different projects, all meant to act as one. But in this, as the years have continued, part of this work became about the United States and its violence abroad, and part of it became about violence at home and where the wealth goes in this country, and of course the vast disparity in wealth in this country. So it became important to me to sort of document these racial and class divides because they were as symbolic of our kind of nature in this latter days of our empire as these wars are. So there's an image from Baltimore. And I think also, if you're telling an honest war story, you're telling a story about beauty from time to time as much as anything else. And also in kind of trying to tell a true war story, I've always felt, as much as I've photographed a lot of combat over the years, that combat itself actually should be a relatively minimal part of the work. Back to you.
Yeah, that's what we see actually. Like throughout your works in this in last 10 years or more than that, your war story doesn't only tell the story of war particularly, but you have shifted your cameras to the other side of the war too. So how did you generate these ideas? Like what was your insight to see this particular war in this different way?
Like anything, it's a process of experience and then kind of drawing conclusions based upon those experiences. When I was first going to Iraq and doing embeds with the United States military, I was really seeking combat. I thought that was the war. That was the war imagery that I'd been exposed to growing up, and that was what I thought I had to do. Thought I had to go out on every patrol and get shot at a lot, and then that's where the photographs would come from. And they did, I got a lot of strong imagery of combat, but at a certain point, it got just very repetitive. It all kind of started to look the same. It was variations of the same thing. And whereas what I was processing and thinking about when it came to the wars went a lot deeper than people shooting at one another. And so at that point, I resolved to kind of tell a fuller story, because if I was just I think some photographers really get off on combat. They have a lust for it on some level. It's thrilling. I found that a bit. It was thrilling for a little while, but pretty quickly I was also like, boy, this isn't my. This is frightening and sort of pointless on some level. So I started getting into situations where I would be working kind of on the front lines, but very much working around the fighting, I sometimes feel a little ashamed when I look at my archive and I have just all these pictures of guys with guns running around shouting, and I do nothing with them. I don't even show them because I don't really see the purpose they serve, and it's a little strange that I risk my life so many times for something that I've sort of not stopped believing in, but don't feel like I'm the person to tell that story. So back to the United States. This is
So what's happening in this picture?
This is a family in Detroit that I spent quite a bit of time with. The Nelson family, and the sister of the two girls in the photograph, and they're a very poor family living in government housing. The sister of the two girls in the photograph had been coerced into becoming a police informant. She's a transgender woman who had been arrested by the police for possessing a small amount of marijuana, and the police essentially threatened her with being put into a male jail if she didn't give them the name of her drug dealer. And as a trans woman, she was obviously terrified about the idea of going to a male prison, and so she got scared and told them this information. What she didn't know was that the police were working with this dealer in a corrupt fashion in order for him to be able to catch a snitch. And so they arrested him, gave him her name, released him, and he kidnapped her, murdered her, dismembered her body, and left it burning by the side of the road. And so this was an image that was part of a longer story I was doing about the use of confidential informants by police forces across the United States. And it so happened I spent a lot of time with this family, and went back on my own time after the assignment because I liked them a lot. We got along, and I wanted to develop a relationship with them. And I'm still in touch with them. They've had a very hard time.
Yep.
And this is a picture, again, all these, as you say, these pictures and metaphors. This was a picture that was a metaphor in some ways for my own kind of violence, I suppose. This is a cousin of mine that another cousin of mine where he had done something kind of wrong, and instead of kind of dealing with it by communication, we decided to just kind of mess with him, and we kind of duct taped him to a wall and blindfolded him, and we're like hitting him with tennis balls and throwing water on him, and not sort of boys will be boys kind of behavior, but also kind of demented and dark. And I think I was going through at this point, and as was my other cousin who I did this with, very dark phases in our life. He just lost his mother. I was very much in this sort of strange stage of post-traumatic stress disorder after working a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think we were like channeling our kind of sadness and grief into anger. And looking at this picture reminds me of the sort of the shame of that moment and the confusion of that moment. And, I'm glad afterwards I was able to, get kind of help for myself in the years that followed to allow me to continue doing my work and to also become a healthier, psychologically and spiritually healthier person.
Yeah, like your pictures sometimes are so mysterious, and it tells stories within stories. So, and I found that um, you have been documenting very diverse and complex landscape of the country, and very different and sometimes very difficult people too. So, and as I say that you like, what is your method to choose like stories within stories?
Yeah, I mean, it's I photograph a lot. I photograph kind of almost as a diary. I'm on assignments a lot, but even in the assignments, I'm photographing around kind of what the news wants a lot of the time. And then I'm oftentimes photographing on a daily basis, whatever kind of catches my eye. And so what I guess I do is I try and take a lot of strong images and then sort out later what I think the story is and is going to be. Um, and yeah, I like that tension between kind of the mystery of the image itself and sometimes the very, very specific point of which the image that you can express in words. And I remember hearing early on when I started writing a lot with my photographs that, words could give away the mystery of a photograph. And for some reason, I was never bothered by that. I guess I don't think they do. I think that words exist in a different space from photographs, and that both are necessary.
Absolutely. So, what's going on in this picture?
Yeah. So this is from the most recent book I'm doing, which deals a lot with kind of nationalism and militarism and myth making in the United States. This is a football game. Is part of this month of what's called Salute to Service, which is a month of the National Football League season devoted to supporting the troops. And the National Football League, in the process of doing that, donates money to a charity that's called the Wounded Warrior Project. But what's interesting about that is there's a lot of cynicism and hypocrisy within that. I mean, they've donated. I think the numbers were about $35 million to this charity over the course of the last 10 years since they started this nationalistic month display of patriotism. So $35 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you take it into account that the NFL has earned $90 billion in that same period of time, and that amounts to about 0.03% of the total revenues, what is meant to be a display of solidarity and financial support for the U.S. military is actually more just a cynical exercise in marketing. So, again, this is the way words factor into the whole thing. You have your image that means something, and then I try and dig beneath the image and find out what are kind of the material facts that I'm looking at. And oftentimes they're, they can complement one another very well. This is a teenager injured in a raid by American soldiers in Iraq. The Ku Klux Klan. I did a story about them 2015, before Trump was even before he'd even announced his candidacy, and it was striking to me because the Ku Klux Klan chapter that I was documenting absolutely loved Trump, and I thought, well, that was kind of surreal. I hadn't been paying much attention to him at that point, and of course, as his candidacy was announced and built up steam, I understood just how. So it was a curious moment to look back on this this kind of obsession bordering on love with Trump from the Ku Klux Klan, and the kind of current manifestation of his divisive and racist politics since then.
So, like, I know that you have also um, worked in difficult situation in Palestine, in Iraq, and you also chose a very difficult path in your own country too. Like, uh, what's the significance behind these pictures? Like, it's in your life, and what is your experience, and how do you take it for your own life?
You mean how have I processed?
No, not only the process, like, but like we see the process, but Miss, what roles does your photography play in your personal life?
Um, I mean, it's sort of my identity in many ways. I it's my identity. It's kind of my memory in many ways of events. My memory is created by what I see, and especially what I see that works as a photograph. Um, it's sort of it's so that being a photographer and the act of photography is so woven in at this point into how I understand the world, and creates the excuse and foundation to explore the world that yeah, I don't know. I'm photography, and photography is me, and I don't know how else to put it. I mean, I suppose it's also it can also be a crutch. A way photography is always a good way of avoiding uh, dealing with oneself and thinking of oneself. And so I suppose the years have gone on. I've tried to live a much more well-rounded life as well, where photography plays a critical role, and maybe the most dominant role, but also that I leave a lot of space for other interests and pursuits, and developing other parts of myself. So, but it still remains kind of deeply integrated into my day to day.
Definitely, we can see it in your picture too. So this was in, yeah,
This is a
where.
yeah, this is sort of a ceremony as the war in Iraq was drawing down for the first time, and I've always been struck about propaganda and the many forms of propaganda. The most recent book deals a lot with that. I'm not really getting into it in these pictures, but who's crafting all these different narratives? Because of course my narrative is its own form of propaganda. And it diverges a lot from the official lines. So, widow of a soldier killed in Afghanistan, measuring a tombstone for her husband. Wedding in Afghanistan. A badly burned U.S. soldier with his son. And this is sort of a bit of a collaborative image on some level, kind of based upon an Instagram photograph that they took together. I've been photographing this guy, Bobby Henline, quite a bit, and his burns are very disfiguring, of course, and I wanted to reserve kind of the journalistic prerogative to document him as I saw him, but I also, as time went on, wanted to work with him and give him some kind of ownership over his image. And this was a picture that we kind of settled on, a family portrait.
So Peter, I know that you always collaborate with a lot of people from the different genre. Like, you collaborate with artists, with journalists, with social workers, and in order to pursue your work. And you met a lot of people, because you were traveling all the time. I like, there is a kind of common perception or even a structure of photography in people's mind that photographs should be always very aesthetically beautiful and stuff like this. So whenever you are taking photos of your subjects and when you show it to them, so your pictures are beautiful, but at the same time, sometimes it's very, it's very disturbing. Your pictures throw questions rather than, only showing the beauty. But how do you like? Did you ever encounter any kind of question or any kind of like, have it ever happened that people didn't like your photograph or they were disappointed that okay, maybe when um, they felt that it was not a good idea to give you access or anything?
Um, not amazingly, not really. At least not said to me. I mean, I would have to assume it's happened, but but it hasn't necessarily been expressed to me for whatever reason. I'm always a bit surprised by that. I mean, I certainly try and be respectful and and fair, but sometimes being respectful and fair also means being pretty brutal. And I that can rub people the wrong way for obvious reasons. So, but weirdly enough, I've gotten very little pushback from subjects, the subjects of the photographs. Sometimes, obviously, I get criticism from um, the photography community about one thing or another, and sometimes I think it's good, informed, thoughtful criticism. Sometimes I think it's just anger and ignorance manifesting itself as criticism. I always try and engage in a civil dialogue about it if a civil dialogue seems possible, and then extract lessons from that from those exchanges when and where those lessons appear. Um, the fact is, photography should always be about and life, whatever, should always be a process of personal growth in various forms. That means both being, I think, very self-critical and I think also receptive to outside criticism, for the betterment of one's work. It doesn't mean every criticism is accurate or fair or worth integrating, but oftentimes they are, and I think I've kind of grown from criticism as well. But I'd say that criticism has come more from the outside world than it has from the subjects for whatever reason.
Definitely.
It's surprising to me, actually. It's funny you mentioned that.
Yeah. So this particular picture is from Afghanistan.
Yep. Eastern Afghanistan, another one of these outposts, kind of apocalypse now like outposts. Soldier at the 15th month of the tour of duty. A wildly different picture in a museum. I talk about history a lot. That's my background in what I studied. Also, my always a long-standing interest, and I'm interested in how kind of museums and institutions craft our history, craft our collective history. And speaking of history, also the form of the way history uh, imprints itself on the present. Um, this is a Choctaw family, part of the Choctaw tribe that had been in the southeastern United States until they were pushed west in the mid 19th century along the Trail of Tears, and so the foundations of kind of land grabbing and genocide and institutional racism within the economic structure and the development structure of the United States is important to me in terms of trying to understand and to represent in the photographs. And a photograph can, represent the consequences of those choices. It can't tell the story of those choices. So again, that's where the words come in to give a picture of of love and of family togetherness, but also of poverty to give it a framework, a context. maybe this is a more traditional war photograph, I suppose. It's one that I'm sometimes tempted not to use, but also I can avoid combat in the images because I don't think combat is so important to telling a war story. But in the end, war is about violence and death in many ways. It's another midnight raid. Maybe I'll go through these a bit quickly because I think we're running out of time, right?
Yeah, sure. Maybe. We have time, but it's
Picture from home. My dad at different points in some of my works. Not this most recent book I did. The family isn't integrated at all, but in my first two books, my family is integrated at different points. Mostly surrounding their thoughts about my decisions because they were quite a bit wiser than my naive youth would. It's the 9/11 museum. Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania last year, booing the media, which happens at every rally. They're very theatrical in their way. A rodeo. These are refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria during the great kind of influx of refugees into Europe in 2015. Suicide bombing, Iraq, what
wow.
they're escaping from.
So um, like we when we look at your pictures, like it tells as I say, like stories and within stories and within stories. So in this time of the world, like in a very difficult and unprecedented time of this world, like how do you want the world to respond to your stories? Do you think like photography can change the world, or do you even think that documentary photography is even relevant in this time?
Um, yeah, I think it's. I don't think any of this stuff is a zero-sum game. I mean, we all know that everyone having a camera and especially a video camera on their cell phone has dramatically changed the world. I mean, if we think back to the last few decades of so-called iconic imagery, a lot of that has come from citizens, whether intended or not. I mean, if you look at Abu Ghraib, those were pictures intended as kind of private memories that became symbols of violence and torture. You take the killing of George Floyd, and that was filmed as an act of documenting something vile and horrific, and of course galvanized that. None of this stuff was done by journalists per se. And then you have, of course, social networks that act as the new gatekeepers that can disseminate information um, in a way that reaches a massive audience without any kind of editorial structures or controls. So, in the last few decades, since you and I have become journalists, the whole structure of power within photography has dramatically shifted. Um, and a lot of those changes are good, and a lot of those changes are less good, and it's how to sort it out is a very complex question. But when it comes back to documentary photography, I suppose it's partly what I feel gives me the license to kind of be myself and take my strange little images because the necessity of photojournalists to go from place to place trying to document the critical events of our times while it continues. It's also a reduced and changed role. But I do deeply continue to believe in photography's ability to uh, be a collective document of history, a document of an era, and that's kind of, I suppose, more what I'm trying to do is kind of create a historical record rather than change the times, because what is, most change has very unintended effects, needless to say.
Sure. So what's going on in this picture?
This is a soldier named Raymond Hubbard with his children. This is quite a long time ago. Again, kind of a collaborative photo. He loved Star Wars. He lost his leg in Iraq, and we tried to take a photo that both served what I thought was my documentary purpose, and also kind of on some level created a memory of a time for him and his kids. And I like when pictures can find that point of tension in them, and I say that clearly with this because it's, I work within photojournalism as well as my own kind of personal work, and so I think it's important to always disclose the terms at which a picture was made if it wasn't made, strictly for journalistic purposes at the time. Those, as much as our world is changing, some of the traditional ethics of the industry, I think, have a lot of, enduring value. This is a raid in Iraq. And a Syrian boy named Ali at the end of his journey of his family to Europe. The remnants of a Choctaw allotment in Oklahoma.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about this picture?
Yeah, I mean, this picture is linked to that previous picture I showed you of the Tom family. It was right nearby there. Under the terms of this sort of forced exodus of the Choctaw tribe, Choctaw amongst others, from the southeast in the mid-19th century, under the terms of that expulsion, there were lands in Oklahoma that were designated as reservations, where the native tribes would be able to sort of live on permanently under treaty with some degree of self-governance, and everyone was given an allotment of land, and so this was from one of those original allotments. Why the family moved and abandoned the homestead, don't remember the story offhand, to be honest. But that's the basic framework for what where this picture was taken. But I suppose also to some degree a symbol of the kind of enduring kind of poverty of that area, because on the native reservations in this country, very, very little governmental or institutional development has been put into them. So the native population remains oftentimes pretty marginalized from the society as a result. I mean, we're seeing right now, of course, with the aftermath of George Floyd's killing, all the institutional structures of economics and race, and how they benefit a very small, oftentimes white minority. And so, but of course, that institutional disrepair and corrupt institutional history and governmental history runs very deep in this country. Again, from the refugee trail. Training.
Yeah, again, like your pictures are so mysterious and at the same time very metaphorical as well. Sometimes it it looks like it's a real event, but at the same time, it looks like it's staged. So, yeah, do you want to talk about a little bit about this? Like how I think this was in a drill or like something like that, right?
Yeah, it was a training,
Training.
what they call combat life-saving training. It's to teach so every soldier knows how to stop the bleeding if someone gets injured. And yeah, I think that I've always been attracted to surreal, confounding photographs, and I think this was one of those moments where I saw that manifesting itself, so sort of realness but surrealness at the same time. Similar here. It's bad sequencing, actually. Similar idea in a sense is from a movie set. And kind of coal mining country, southern Illinois. Back to Iraq. This is Standing Rock, March of American Veterans, in protest of the pipeline. This is outside of Las Vegas, a homeless encampment right on the perimeter of Nellis Air Force Base, which probably has hundreds of billions of dollars worth of military hardware inside. This is a F-16, a $30 million jet, a relatively cheap jet flying overhead. Back to the refugee trail. Tea Party rally in Iowa. And so the next few pictures, these are just a few from the COVID era and this most recent era. So again, surreal. This is as things started to slowly return to normal in New York, but was still messed up. From Maryland, drive-through church. I mean, of course, this was the time of, especially the early days of the crisis, time of great uncertainty and fear for people.
Right. I heard in one of your interview you were saying that you have been doing a particular project with the long lens camera in U.S. Mexico border. Do you want to talk about a little bit about that project?
Oh yeah, God, I don't think I even have anything from that in this work. I'm a little too obsessive. There's too many in Israel and Palestine. I didn't get into any of that. I've been working on for 8 years. The long lens, yeah. That I'll have to see how that work plays out. That was kind of what I was planning to work on this year. Is this sort of kind of trilogy of books I've been doing about the United States at war in Iraq and Afghanistan and the war coming home, and really looking at the U.S. and its kind of imperial ambitions in the post 9/11 period. You know, that work is not drawing to a close, but I'm kind of very much ready to move on into different notions of what this country is, and I think you can't really tell a story about the United States without telling a story about the United States and its relationship to Mexico. So last year I did a few trips. One as part of this big Magnum trip I organized, another solo trip down to Juarez and Tijuana, and I was just going to these border towns and trying to find a language for something that was in many ways a new way of looking at the United States for me, and looking at the United States while looking at Mexico, and of course, and how they intertwine. And I was using a lot, long lens, which is present in quite a few of these pictures here as well. Things like this, and a lens which compresses. Oh, I got dust on my sensor. Look at that. I haven't even cleaned that thing out. Whoops. That's what happens when you're still editing. And an image like the one of the, I started using it with this Trump rally before. Well, maybe I don't need to go to it, but it's a way of essentially a way of compressing space and fitting more information into an image, and adding a twist of surrealism as well. And so these are all things I like. I like complex pictures. I like complex pictures populated with a lot of people. I like complex pictures that sometimes can be on the verge of incoherence, and where space is kind of defined in strange ways. A photograph is not the world itself. It's very much an interpretation of the world, and I like to play with that idea. So that just explains it. And this one also, a lot of the recent work has been with longer lenses, but I'm again, it's a tool. I'm always interested in what the different tools can do, and I'm very interested in what technology can do. And obviously, a lot of visual capabilities have come from technology in the last years that are very intriguing to explore as a photographer. I mean, like this is a drone image, an empty parking lot on a warm early summer day during the lockdown. I couldn't take that picture from the ground. It had to be a picture from the air. Well, I couldn't really rent a plane, but now that we have drones, you can see things. If you can see things or you can imagine things, you can manifest them in a photograph oftentimes. Of course, shortly afterwards, I crashed my drone.
Yeah, definitely.
Anti-lockdown protest. Back to New York, a funeral home. Another one from the funeral home. The aftermath of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And a colleague and friend of mine, and maybe I don't know if you know Ed O yourself, Andrew, but
Yeah, Ed.
I was,
Yeah, yeah. I
sorry, go ahead.
I heard his news, and it was very pathetic. Very very sad.
Yeah, I mean, and he's okay. He had to get some stitches. It was a nasty scalp wound. Scalp wounds are always very bloody. But it was, it was very disturbing, and potentially a sign of things to come. The kind of viciousness and aggressiveness, and of which the police went into the crowd of peaceful protesters in Minneapolis, shooting without any real sense of restraint or scale. And a lot of journalists got hurt that day. Again, from Minneapolis, and also a picture dealing with, of course, the militarization of the police, which was disconcerting and potentially very problematic if the civil unrest in this country spills over into civil war. Trump's rally in Tulsa. That's it. That's the presentation. That's 15 years and 50 pictures.
Awesome. So I know that this is not enough space, or I think this is not the perfect space to accommodate your big scale of work, of course. But I know that you are also you all are also teaching photography, like mentoring style, like you are mentor of our Arab documentary project, as well as as you are always nurturing new photographers. And like, what insights do you enforce to the aspiring photographers in order to pursue photography in this current time? What should be the role of the photographers to build this uh, a better community or a better world, you think?
Yeah, I mean, in the program that you mentioned, this Arab documentary photography program, it's a great program that it's a free program where the selected students from across the Arab world, come to Beirut twice over the course of 7 months, and work on a project that they're funded for by the organization in between that 7-month period. And that process for me and the other mentors is very much one of helping people kind of develop their individual vision. I mean, to my mind, that's the most interesting, that's the most critical thing a photographer can do, is find the visual language and the intellectual language to say something about themselves or their society or the world around them that's clear, coherent, complex, rigorous, and aesthetic at the same time. And so that's where my belief comes down. And everybody has a different needs, different interests, different set of concerns. For me, that's my particular set of concerns, and especially in this program, because being a photographer from the United States, it's really in many ways a cultural and linguistic outsider to the Middle East, and yet being tasked by major publications to tell a story that's supposed to be a story about these places, that's an impossible position to be in. And it's very humbling in many ways. It's also troubling in other ways, because I feel while I can work with a certain authoritativeness around certain subjects, ultimately it's just one voice, just one vision, and it's not nearly enough. And so a lot of the reason why I want to work in this program, why I do work in this program and work with photographers outside this program is this continued importance to me of telling a story you can tell, and that can be manifested in a million different ways. But ultimately, I suppose I have less of a belief and less of an interest of just going to some place to take pictures that are visual and graphical because you can. I think it's important to try and tell a story about something that you can seek to understand, that you can go deep in, that can occupy a lot of time, that can say something new to society, to the world. I mean, again, it comes back to your earlier question of the way things have changed through the availability of technology and social media. In a sense, anyone can document something powerful if they have a camera. It doesn't require a tremendous amount of visual skill or technical skill. But not everyone can go deep and go broad and ask these questions visually and intellectually. And so I think that's really the opportunity in photography, the continued opportunity in photography, and the thing that I try and encourage the most. If that answers your question. The flip side of that being that it's also not necessarily pragmatic. These things take a lot of time, a lot of investment, and there are limited outlets for it. So the other thing I work on really I try and work on with students is thinking about how to build a robust economic structure for oneself and one's photography. To think about when you're a photographer that is a journalist and as a creative, but also as an entrepreneur and also as a businessman, business person. And so those are the two poles. It's all good to have pipe dreams about, ethereal work that is a means of self-expression. It's quite another to survive on the basis of that. So I think you have to have the dreaming and also the practical at the same time. So I would encourage any younger photographer here to develop your vision, develop your stories, but be thinking from the very beginning about how you're going to sustain yourself, because it's a real labor of love to do this work, especially as a freelancer. And you have to be smart about how you're going to fund yourself.
Yeah, definitely, it's very important too, because if we don't sustain, then it's really difficult to bring out the stories too. So, Peter, I think we are at the end of our presentation. I really want to thank you. What's your next endeavor? What you are gonna go next?
I'm on vacation now for the next 2 weeks. I've been on vacation, and then at the end of August I covered the RNC, and then I think from there into the fall, into the election, into the aftermath, it's going to be kind of crazy. I'm not planning much because so much is happening. So for the first time in my life, in a way, I'm taking things as they come because the history is very much in motion right now, and this is not a time for reflecting necessarily on the other aspects I might be interested in. It's a time to, I think, remain open and responsive to the terms of the era.
Yeah, definitely. I really wish you a very, very, very best of you. And of course, I hope that maybe we will meet you again, like we will meet each other again in the field, maybe perhaps. I mean, you never know, right?
Hopefully when we're not getting tear gassed, right? But that's the most likely outcome.
Yeah. I really appreciate that you putting your time and, making this presentation for us. I think it was very, very insightful. And thank you very much. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Andrew. Take care.
You too. Have a nice one.
You too. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Have a nice one. So viewers, it is my constant effort to present legendary and successful photographers from all around the world and stories behind their legendary photographs. All my last 5 episodes, including this one, are uploaded on my YouTube channel and on my website. So if you like them and feel them, feel free to share it, like it, and subscribe it, of course. So let me just give you the links for this one, and so you can always find the last 4 or 5 episodes of photos and stories on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Andrew Biraj, and on my YouTube page, youtube.com/user/Andrew Biraj. So I will appear in the next episode with a new guest, with another spectacular photographer, and with some amazing stories. Until then, stay tuned.